So, Heather, interesting week in the news. I feel like we say that every week on some level, and many times it is. But a lot of disparate things going on. We have across the country, there have been I don't want to exaggerate, but there have been cities. We still have ongoing protests. We still have, almost a daily example of the police either being incredibly violent at a protest or continuing to shoot unarmed black men or shoot. We have a case in Georgia this week where they essentially harassed a guy for about 45 minutes who was sleeping in his car. They suspected of being drunk, but of course he was sleeping in his car. He wasn't driving, and that led to him being shot. We have the varied attempts of police reform that we're seeing around the country. Different Albuquerque, not necessarily cutting their police department, but building sort of an apparatus that would presumably take over a significant portion of their responsibilities. Philadelphia cutting their police budget. There's talk in New York of perhaps cutting a police budget to $1 billion. We haven't quite seen that yet. Donald Trump put on a little bit of a cosplay this week, talking about how it's time to get rid of the chokehold, except for when the police feel like they need it. And, trying to act like a human being, in part because I think he realizes he's in big trouble with black voters. He was never going to get a lot of black voters, but he didn't need much to significantly improve his performance and perhaps, from an electoral college standpoint, help him. They got some big pushback by scheduling a rally. And there's two aspects of this. One is that they're doing it in a closed arena in Oklahoma. And the other is that they scheduled it on Juneteenth in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa, of course, was the location of maybe the worst race massacre in single day massacre in the United States, where the Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma was essentially attacked and existed, and private planes dropping bombs on people. And he was going to do this on Juneteenth. There was enough pushback that they switched it to Saturday. Give me your sense of all those disparate things that are happening just in that one sort of silo.
Well, it's amazing. And, the Juneteenth thing is unbelievable. And, of course, we saw Trump gave a bunch of interviews this past week. And in one of them, I think it may have been the Wall Street Journal, but I can't be absolutely sure. He talked to a bunch of people. But one of the things he said was that he did, the black community a big favor because he told everybody about Juneteenth because nobody knew about it before he did that. So, and he said that he polled everybody in the White House, presumably all the white people, and they hadn't heard of it. So, he really did them a big favor with that whole thing because now everybody knows what Juneteenth is, which of course is just, it's so ignorant. It's right up there with the Frederick Douglass thing, where he said that, Frederick Douglass is doing some great work these days, and it's good to see him being acknowledged or whatever it was. I mean, right. He's so ignorant, and particularly about this kind of stuff. He's ignorant about everything, but particularly about anything to do with the African American history or any kind of American history, and on these sort of, very, very delicate and difficult, and challenging kinds of, racial and cultural, subjects, issues. He's completely the wrong person. And so, of course, you have to go back and look at Trump when it comes to the police reform thing. Because I think it's very interesting to me. I mean, we know that he can't learn anything. I mean, he just isn't capable of learning from his own mistakes or from a book or anything else. And one of the things that really struck me this week, and I wrote a piece about it for Salon, was the fact that, it was almost exactly 3 years ago that we had the incident in Charlottesville. We all know what Trump did and what he basically did. He didn't take it seriously at all. At the time, we weren't quite sure how he was going to react to this stuff. It was still early enough. It was in his first year, and we didn't know whether or not he might listen to somebody or maybe someone would tell him something about how to act in these situations. And he waited for 48 hours before he said anything. This was after the demonstration. That night, where they had the guys marching with the tiki torches, saying Jews will not replace us, and defending the Confederate statues. And then the next day, of course, where the big street protests and the killing of Heather Heyer, the protester, the anti-racist protester. In any case, he took 48 hours to respond to that. And then he came out and he gave a really perfunctory, weird speech. He was there to do he was at Bedminster at his golf club in New Jersey. And he gave this weird speech where he said, he talked about the veterans and he did this and that. And then he said something, he said, well, this is wrong. Little children should be able to go out go play in the streets and be with their parents and have a good time. That was his statement. And he said something about how, there are good people on both sides. Well, that did not go over well. That was the first speech. He came out the next day in response to all the criticism, and he actually gave a good speech. I don't think people remember this. It was actually good. Obviously, it was teleprompter written by somebody else, and he said racism will not be tolerated, and we have to work together and bring the country together and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, when I went back, and obviously when I was writing this piece, I went back and reviewed all this, and I'm looking at it going, wow, there was a moment there where Trump listened to somebody and actually could have been that president. But because of his earlier speech, when he was quizzed about it a couple of days after that at a press conference, he lost it. Went back to being, he became himself again. The real Trump asserted itself. And that's when he said, there were very fine people on both sides, which is now an infamous comment that will dog him to the end of his days. It's one of those things that he will be remembered for having said it. So, clearly he has learned nothing. And I was reminded of the fact as he was standing up there holding a press conference now after another several days of him, being completely off base and tin-eared about the moment in the wake of the George Floyd murder. And, he ostensibly was going to introduce an executive order that was going to deal with, the policing, racist policing and violent policing. And, of course, it was very thin gruel. I mean, it wasn't, it was something, but it was nothing. And what was most, obvious to me about it was that he's standing there surrounded by police officers who were invited to the Rose Garden, and he goes into this big long spiel about, he says a few good words about how, we need to do these reforms, and then went on and on and on about law and order, and the police were the greatest people in the world, and the only ones who were guilty of anything was this tiny, and he says, and I use the word tiny, I don't know why, this tiny percent that maybe do some things wrong. And then he stood there and he sat down and he signed the thing surrounded by police, and they all smiled and grinned, and the whole thing was so off key to me. I was watching this just going, this man can never learn anything. And again, it reminds you of an earlier situation where he, back in 1989 in New York City, during the Central Park 5 situation where he took out that full-page ad, and the title of it was "Bring Back the Death Penalty, Bring Back Our Police," and that is who he is. And the idea that somehow that this president in this moment, it just literally could not be worse. From the gassing of the protesters to calling people in, calling for the active duty military to take to the streets, this whole painful episode on so many levels that I think, the entire country has had its consciousness raised, or at least, a large majority of it has, and is starting to recognize, this sort of having this gut-wrenching confrontation with our racist culture and policing, and the absolute need to take finally take a hard look. I mean, I have no guarantee that that's actually going to happen, but we are in a moment where I think we're closer than we've been in any time I can remember of actually doing something about it. And here we
Right.
have this president just basically representing this weird antediluvian attitude of, the law and order, and we've got to, protect our police and whatever. And it was so jarring, just proving once again that, he is the absolute worst person to be leading the country at a moment like this. And, it would be depressing if it weren't so dangerous, Instead, it
Right.
makes you angry, or makes me
Right.
angry anyway.
Right. It's almost so you can't afford to feel sad about it because you sort of you've got to man the ramparts, as it were.
Exactly.
And we're also seeing things like in Atlanta where the police are,
Right.
we're starting to see these sort of the police essentially trying to leverage their the protection of people in the city to I guess prevent any type of genuine reform. And so I really do think we are at and we talked about this quite a bit, I think, last week. Just, we're at a tipping point. I don't know that means necessarily we're going to get big change right now, but I do think at least attitudes have changed enough that, it's hard to know how much these attitudes, I'm talking about white people, really. I mean, because I think there's nothing that I think black people, I don't think that to the extent that, polling has changed on this, it's not black people. Black people have been fully aware of what of these issues for a long time. But I think that there's, just a greater awareness or presumably caring by white people, not all white people, but the numbers have shifted a little bit, and it will be interesting to see how durable these attitudes are if Donald Trump is not a part of the equation, and I think that also goes for things like immigration, frankly, and a lot of other things. I mean, there's been a lot of research that shows between Obama and Trump, a lot of political issues have become racialized in many respects. For the right under Obama and for the left under Trump. And so one wonders and one hopes, certainly, that these attitudes will continue in this trajectory, regardless of Trump being a foil or not. And I suspect it will. And that brings up immigration. We had two big rulings so far. We've got, I think, about 5 other cases coming in the next, week or so. That have yet to be resolved at the Supreme Court that are pretty important ones. Trump's finances, the constitutionality of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There's a couple others, faithless electors.
There's a big abortion case coming down.
There's a big abortion case with a trap law in Louisiana. There's, I believe, one other that escapes me at the moment. But this week, we've had 2 cases that were resolved, and they were both, frankly, I mean, they were a little bit shocking. Next week, we're going to be talking to get a Supreme Court wrap up, but we should we should talk about these. Earlier in the week, we had a 6-3 decision on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was a question of discrimination in the context of employer to employee relationship. And the court found that the prohibition about firing someone and job discrimination because of their sex meant that you could also not discriminate against someone for being gay or transgender. And the argument, at least as presented by Neil Gorsuch, was a so-called textualist one. I happen to think this is a bunk legal theory, but it worked out well this time, was that essentially boils down to this, is that if you would not fire a woman for dating a man, then you cannot fire a man for dating a man. And, or you could present it, if you would not fire a man for dating a woman, you cannot fire a woman for dating a woman. If you would not fire a woman for who was born as a whose birth record says born as a female and is presenting as a female, as working for you, you cannot fire that person if they are presenting as a male, because it involves their sex, and that was it. And it's a pretty straightforward ruling. I'm not sure I necessarily subscribe to the reasoning, but fine, it worked out well. I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned about such textualism being established, but it's there. But with Gorsuch, it's going to be there. And then later in the week, 5-4 decision, the Trump administration is not competently sunk DACA, and so therefore they can't. I mean, that is what it really amounts to. And so, but nevertheless, that's going to make, regardless of the legal reasoning, we're talking about millions of people who were unprotected in the workplace because they were gay or transgender are now finally going to be able to not suffer discrimination, or at the very least will have a mechanism in which to fight against that discrimination. Maybe about half the states did not have any type of statutes protecting people in that way, and there's going to be a lot of ancillary fallout from this. Title VIII in housing. There's even in Alito's dissent, he said there was about 100 statutes that also reference no discrimination based on sex, and presumably those protections are going to be afforded to LGBTQ folks, which is fantastic and has like a material impact on millions of people's daily lives. Same with the DACA ruling. Close to 1 million, I think, we're talking about, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, and million if you talk about their families and their friends, and they finally can breathe easy, at least for the time being. I mean, knock on wood, Donald Trump won't have a second term and another bite at this apple, but that they're safe and secure. And so I think we've got a lot of problematic decisions coming down the pike with this conservative court, but for the moment, anyways, and it could change in just like in a day or two, some pretty good outcomes.
Well, look, I mean, my feeling is this. Look, this is a conservative majority on this court, and I don't have very high expectations for anything. But if they come up with rulings that, based on whether it's because Donald Trump's people are substandard, D-list, terrible lawyers who don't know how to don't know how to discriminate properly, or, it's just, as kind of an affirmation of a weird conservative style of jurisprudence that they're trying to promote. Whatever the court's reasonings are there, if it's exactly as the end result at this moment is that millions of people, their lives are materially improved, or they can breathe easier for a little bit, or that actually human beings are positively affected by this. I'm surprised and I'm happy, because what that says to me is that I will not have high expectations. I'm thoroughly expecting this conservative majority to hand down some rulings that are going to be awful. Honestly, I can't imagine that that's not going to happen in ways that will have the opposite effect. on actual human beings' lives.
Right.
We're dealing with a very, very, and this is going to be with us for quite some time to come, I'm sad to say. But I'll take it. And I will also, I have to assume this is, we're going into this election, and it's one of the things, everybody's saying, this week as those rulings came down, well, it's handing Trump something he can get his flock together or his cult together and use the demagogue the hell out of these issues and get them out to vote. And, frankly, I think putting anything that puts a barrier between Donald Trump and the Supreme Court is probably a good thing. That it's fine. I think his people are going to come out to vote anyway. But these fissures on the conservative side, these things where, a lot of Republicans who are sticking with Trump because out of just some tribal loyalty, and there are plenty of them. There's 40% plus in this, voters who are still, with Donald Trump. This is the kind of thing where it matters, where you can sort of see some divisions being sown there, which is good. The entire conservative movement is in crisis, as well it should be. It's not just Trump; it's their entire philosophy is being questioned now. And this is the kind of thing that can do that, where you have people, not just never Trumpers, people who don't like his tweets or whatever. I'm talking about people looking at the very, the entire program and questioning it. And you do see that a little bit. I mean, it's important that these people be weakened and be questioning themselves. So this is the kind of thing where you see a division, even if it's just on some kind of, utilitarian sort of basis. I think it's valuable, and I'm happy to see it because, Roberts, people are going to be asking forever, what does John Roberts really want? What's he after? Is it court legitimacy? Is he just throwing out some lifelines in case Joe Biden wins and, so he won't do something destructive to the court or whatever. I don't even know. I've read a bunch of things about what's motivating John Roberts. But the truth is that whatever it is that they're doing, if they do things like this, even on these sort of instrumental grounds, it gives some sort of lifeline to anyone who thinks that the actual rule of law or the way things are supposed to work, even if it works in favor of conservatives, that somehow or another that those kinds of institutional sort of ways of governance are still potentially in effect. I don't know, but I was pleased to at least see that much. I don't have very many high hopes, but at least some DACA kids and some LGBTQ people are know that that Jerry Falwell Jr. isn't running everything, and that Donald Trump and VDARE isn't running everything on immigration. That maybe there's some hope that there are some conservatives out there who might still believe in some vestige of humanity.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I keep thinking that we are probably, I don't know, a day or two away from the 200th federal judge that Mitch McConnell will have ran through the Senate. Yeah. And so I think there's also probably going to be a feeling of like, well, we lose a couple of small fish because we're about to, have the big haul over the next 20 or 30 years. I mean, that's basically what we're talking about. When you have 200.
All we're going to get is small fish for some time to come, I'm afraid. There's no big fish for the good guys. Mitch McConnell, the Grim Reaper, has done his job, and, it's not going to be pretty. I don't even want to think about what's going to happen in the courts over the next 20 years. It's awful.
I will also say Chuck Schumer has I think, helped him quite a bit, frankly. And, I have not been impressed by Chuck Schumer's. I don't think he has any real interest in blocking what McConnell has done. I mean, I think that's pretty apparent. There could have been ways of gumming up things, but Chuck Schumer was always afraid of a fight, and so much so that the guys out there, recruiting. One of the side stories we interviewed Charles Booker in Kentucky, an amazing candidate, running in a primary to take on Mitch McConnell. Now, look, the chances of a Democrat beating Mitch McConnell were always pretty slim.
Any Democrat.
Any Democrat. I don't care who it is. But for whatever reason, Chuck Schumer was insistent on Amy McGrath and pouring tens of millions of dollars into this primary campaign. And it's there is, and we're seeing this too with, and I don't mean to pivot, but we've talked about the SCOTUS and we're talking about the courts, and it just occurs to me because on Tuesday we have elections in New York as well. When you look at what they're doing, like the effort exerted to have Amy McGrath beat Charles Booker in the primary, when there's very little chance of beating Mitch McConnell, and if you look at the polls, it's hard to know which polls to take seriously, but the polling shows that Booker probably does a little bit better than McGrath. Certainly has far better favorable ratings. I mean, significantly, like high double-digit better ratings, favorable ratings. But nevertheless, there's a lot of money to burn in this year on a primary that you're not even picking the best candidate. You're trying to pick a candidate who is going to be to the right of you if you're Chuck Schumer. Now, we can have a debate as to, who's got a better shot in Kentucky, right or left. I don't know, frankly. And there's certainly no data points to suggest that it's necessarily Amy McGrath. I mean, the polling shows otherwise. But if you look at that, and then you also look at what's happening in New York with Eliot Engel. We also interviewed Jamal Bowman and also Adnan Girgagas, who I think it's Girgagas, who was another progressive running in that race. He dropped out to support Bowman because Bowman had sort of managed to coalesce all the support. And you have Warren, Sanders, AOC, progressive supporting Bowman. And you have Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton supporting Engel, who, just to remind everybody, voted against the signature issue of Barack Obama's foreign policy. And it's like Chuck Schumer was not keyed up for this race. It's not like he got in this race, 6 to 8 months ago. He just put out an endorsement 3 days ago. And it really does feel like there are alarm bells going off amongst some Democrats because they are afraid not even of having progressive members of their caucus, although I'm sure they're afraid of that as well. They're afraid of even like progressive members winning a primary. And, like in Kentucky. And there just seems to be like a real intense pushback on progressives winning, where ostensibly, right, we're told Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they're ostensibly progressives. It's a little bit strange.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, but the two situations. The one with Engel in New York doesn't surprise me at all because look, we know what happened with Joe Crowley, right? I mean, AOC, that was a shocking sort of upset, and now they're looking at, oh my God, in a lot of blue, big blue districts, that is a real threat. And, that you're going to have more progressives come along. There are more, that is the place where you're going to find the progressives, right?
Of
That's
course.
a very logical place to do a primary from the left. And Crowley scared the hell out of them. Now they're seeing that Engel is under pressure, and that doesn't surprise me. The Kentucky situation, though, it's completely absurd. Number one, Schumer should not be playing in a primary in Kentucky. I don't think he even knows what the hell he's talking about there. Maybe he thought he was, giving McConnell a scare, or, remember back in the old days, and it wasn't that long ago, where the leadership would never challenge each other, You know, they would never back any kind of a challenge in their own district. I mean, that was as recent, I think, as like Tom Daschle, which was in the early 2000s when the Republicans went after him and broke that norm. Well, you know, maybe Chuck Schumer thought he was being cute or funny or whatever, but it's ridiculous because what Schumer should be doing is letting a primary play out with the strongest candidate among Democrats, right? I mean, if they were to win, if for some reason it's one of those waves, right? And maybe McConnell in some miracle he actually is in trouble. You'd want the strongest Democratic candidate there because you want to get excitement and get people coming out to vote. Why would you pick one that does not do that among the Democrats in their own state? I mean, it makes no sense. If it's a wave, it's a wave. Get a blue person in there. Get somebody who gets the base excited. Don't do something where you're trying to, go to both ends against the middle. It makes no sense. And I don't, so basically I think Schumer spent all that money just to thinking he was rattling Mitch's cage, and I don't think Mitch's cage is rattled at all by Amy McGrath. He's not fair to her.
But even if you give Schumer that benefit of the doubt that like he was doing it for this, that's a dumb way to rattle the cage. Like, why wouldn't you go with Booker in that instance? Like, how much cage rattling is it to run this centrist Democrat who is like, bragging about her relationship with Trump? Like, no, you want to rattle Mitch McConnell's cage. You want to nationalize this race. You have him run against a progressive black candidate. I mean, like. Does Chuck Schumer not understand the fault lines that have come across here in this era?
No.
Like how much more obvious could it be? And this guy's just bad at politics. And my understanding is he's also just like he in the Senate, the guy just is constantly trying to placate all members. And so ends up, saying a lot of things to a lot of different members that are not necessarily, he's not terribly attached to. Let's put it that way.
I mean, say what you will about Harry Reid, and I had problems with some of his politics too, but I think he was a much sharper, sharper elbowed kind of partisan player. And, Schumer is just not up for the task. There must be somebody better than him. I wonder if there'll be a challenge if the Senate does change, by some miracle, changes hands. Probably not, because usually they march around to the big victory lap. Look how great I was, when it really had nothing to do with Schumer, and so then he'll be the big hero. But it would be nice if there was somebody in the Senate who could do, because I agree with you. This guy is just ineffectual. He's ineffectual in every way, and if the Democrats do have a majority, he's going to be sitting there looking at Mitch McConnell, who proclaimed this week that he had no intention of stepping down as the leader of the Republican caucus. The Republicans have always been very good, very effective at being in the minority in a way that Democrats just do not seem to learn. And I just, I worry that a lot of what's needed, there's going to be desperate need for some very rapid, smart, tough, aggressive legislation to start to put things back together again, much less move forward. And is he going to be able to do it? Because I just don't know. I mean, I worry about that.
Oh, I can answer that question for you. I mean, frankly, what we need is someone like an Elizabeth Warren, who is, I think, not necessarily, in my estimation, the best when it comes to politics, on an outside game type of thing, and not so much, in terms of where her power derives from voters. I think that she's got some big blind spots there, but I don't think that there's anybody in the Senate who understands how to operate in terms of institutional politics like she does. I mean, Chuck Schumer, I think he's two things. I think one is he has no ideological core whatsoever. And so his agenda is just basically protecting his own power base and his own ass. And I don't think he's particularly good at anything besides that, frankly. and it comes through. But we're a little bit far afield. Let's talk about another inept person, and we just got a couple more minutes here. But and that is Donald Trump. John Bolton came out. His book leaked. I think they wanted to get it out the door because the White House, the Department of Justice, was suing him. Look, you and I have talked about this in the past. John Bolton is a garbage person. He's a garbage.
Lowest of the low.
He was so bad that he could not get confirmed to a position at the UN in front of a Republican Senate back in 2000, maybe it was 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And George Bush had to appoint him as a recess appointment. That's how sort of how he has been, how far outside the mainstream he was and how far he's been brought in to the mainstream. And I think people, just sort of largely forgot that. But he's an odd guy, I think in some respects a troubled guy, and was much more suited, in my estimation, as a Fox News contributor.
Mm-hmm.
Classic case of no honor amongst thieves. And I guess, it's nice to have a little bit more detail and to have a lot of things confirmed about Donald Trump. But there's nothing in there that we didn't know. And all he is John Bolton's out there, sort of like really showing the heart of the Republican Party, which is me above all else. Screw the country. I can monetize this, and I'm going to, right? I mean, that's like almost the ideology. What's in my own self-interest is best for society. And, right? I mean, it's the pursuit of my, each individual pursuing their own self-interest. Yeah. That's what he did. And so I would recommend to people, obviously, don't buy the book. Read the highlights, and that's all you need. Or wait till it come out on one of those, sort of condensed things, so you can just read it as a condensed thing.
Right, exactly.
But exactly. Donald Trump, I mean, who knows how it's going to impact him? There's also another book coming out from his niece that I'm more interested in reading, frankly, because she's not in any way enabling this guy. And
it's stuff we haven't heard before. I'm curious about that too.
Yeah, it's a totally different sort of realm. But so let's just talk about Donald Trump in terms of this campaign. His polling is at maybe one of his lowest ebbs, certainly against Joe Biden, but even in terms of job approval numbers. He is heading to Tulsa this weekend, much to the sort of quiet angst of the Tulsa mayor and all the medical people there. They're going to be indoors. I have a pool on my show. I've taken 10% will be the number of people wearing masks. And, it's unclear to me whether I can count the reporters in that because, and who knows, maybe they'll have a spike, maybe they won't, of coronavirus. But Donald Trump is sort of desperately trying to bail water. They're finding that Joe Biden is not as hated as Hillary Clinton was. I imagine that is, I don't know how it breaks down, but it's a combination of misogyny and also just sort of extended hatred of Hillary Clinton over multiple years and people having a cottage industry. I think there's misogyny, and I think there's also her last name, frankly, because there was a lot of leftover animosity towards Bill Clinton. And so Trump seems to be panicking a little bit. And the question is, when you have 9 to 6 states, I think, in the country now have had multiple record days of infections. Arizona's very close to busting through their ICU capacity. Can we even measure anything in terms of this political race? Because who knows what's going to happen 3 weeks from now?
I just, to me, this looks like a death cult. The idea that Trump is insisting that his people come into an indoor environment, and his followers they're not the young protesters that were out in the outdoors in the streets the other days. These are older people, many of whom I am sure have all these what they call comorbidities, that make it more likely that they're going to get very sick if they get the disease. And he is telling them not to wear masks. He in fact, I think he said this week that in one of those interviews we mentioned earlier that the wearing of people are wearing masks because they don't like Donald Trump. That's what he was saying. He says that the pandemic is dying out, that it's fading away, that it's not really happening. In other words, you can believe me or you can believe your lying eyes. And so all of those people are going to show up, and they're going to go in there, and I have no doubt that that it's a super spreader, what they call a super spreader event. We may not know for another month or more as to how far this thing spread, and by that time he will have had a whole bunch more of these things. And I said, I sort of quipped in a rather dark way the other day, maybe they should just hand out Kool-Aid at the door because, the Jim Jones style Kool-Aid, because to die of COVID is a horrible way to die. And the idea that he's doing this to his own people, it's just one of the most stunning things in a very, very stunning administration and presidency. I just can't believe he would do this. And it's all so that he can prove that he didn't mess up in the beginning, and that he's beaten the virus and that it's no big deal, and to get that stock market up and to get the economy back and all of these things. And of course, all of that is completely contingent upon the virus being contained to a degree that people believe they can go out and do things. I mean, apparently he thinks that his own voters are the only people he needs to get the economy going again. The whole thing is absolutely astonishing to me. I can't, this is one of those things where I think people will look back on this and just think it was one of the most demented decisions he made, and there have been a lot of them. But this one really takes the cake. He is determined to get out there and put his convince his voters that this disease isn't real, and get them out there so that they will give it to each other. What? What kind of a person would do that sort of? What kind of a politician would do it? He's getting his own voters sick. I mean, what?
Well,
I can't get past it.
Who knows? I don't know how people like that will respond. Maybe it will just be like a badge of honor.
Maybe they'll die for the cause.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll, like the Confederates, just throw themselves into the battle.
Indeed,
they're willing to die for Donald Trump.
Well, we will have a better sense of the implications of that rally in about 3 weeks. So sometime around July 4th, we'll get a sense.
Yeah, should be quite a celebration.
Heather, as always, a real pleasure. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Sam. Thanks for having me.